Hi guys, today's video is going to be an easy way to make biscuits and gravy from scratch. In the background you'll see me taking some milk and mixing it with lemon juice. That's because this recipe calls for buttermilk. If you don't have buttermilk on hand, or if you don't want to spend money for a big thing of buttermilk, you can take 1 cup of regular milk to a half a teaspoon of either lemon juice or white vinegar, and then let it sit for a couple minutes after you stir it up, and that will give you the same result as regular buttermilk. We're then going to go in with 3 cups of flour, and while I'm mixing up these biscuits, I have my oven in the background preheating to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Alright, skipping ahead. Now our next ingredient, we're going to go in with some baking powder and salt. And you'll want to get all of your dry ingredients in the bowl first and then sift those together or just stir them together. So we're going in, it's quite a bit of salt. It's 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and you could substitute this with like pink Himalayan salt or possibly even sea salt, I think would be just fine. Next we're going in with baking powder. We're going to use 2 tablespoons of this and an extra teaspoon of baking powder. And you do want to make sure that it's baking powder and not baking soda. Baking soda causes things to rise, and these biscuits, the way that we're going to fold them on themselves, they're going to rise on their own anyway. You don't want them to get too big in there. The next ingredient is going to be 2 teaspoons of regular sugar. And here I poured my milk in before I went in with my butter. You really want to put your butter in first and press it in with your pastry blender into your flour mixture before you add the milk. So that's one thing that I will tell you, is to do these 2 steps backwards. Butter first and get it mixed into your flour mixture real well, and then put your milk in. So I did a little bit backwards. And another thing that is key with these biscuits is you want to make sure that the butter is cold. So I didn't take mine out of the fridge until right before I cut it and put it into this bowl, because the butter being cold and then warming up and melting in the oven is what's going to cause these biscuits to rise like you want them to. So you're just going to take, it's a 1.5 sticks of cold butter. You're just going to cut it into smaller squares like this, break them apart and put it in there in your flour mixture. Then I'm going in with my pastry blender, and I blended all of that together. And if you don't have a pastry blender, you could probably take like a fork or a potato masher or something for this, or if you had a food processor, you could do just like you would pie crust and put your flour and butter mixture in there and then mix those that way. Okay, cleaning off my pastry blender. Now the next is 1 egg. So I'm going to crack that in there. And then you're going to go back in with your pastry blender, and with the egg, you can either crack it directly into the bowl, or you could have it cracked in a smaller bowl and then mix it up and then pour it in. I just crack mine straight in because it's one less step. And the blending process will take quite a few minutes. That's why you'll see me speeding through this. But you really want to make sure you got all of those ingredients well incorporated, because you don't want to take a bite of your biscuit and get a really big mouthful of straight baking powder, because it's kind of sour. So now we're going to go into this dough with 2 tablespoons of cold water. I just did mine straight from the sink. You could have a glass of actual ice water sitting next to you while you're working. That would be just as well. I'm just taking this dough now and squishing it with my hands a little bit to get it into a sort of a ball, and then dumping it out. The big thing with this, just like with pie crust, you don't want to overwork it with your hands and get that butter too soft and warm, or it won't cook like it's supposed to and get that nice flakiness to it. So now I'm pressing this sort of into a ball, and then I'm going to go over with a little bit of flour on my counter to keep it from sticking. And then we're going to roll this out, and the key to getting your biscuits to puff up is that once we roll this dough, we're going to be making folds in it. So I'm getting my pan ready for once these biscuits are cut. These are best when they're cooked in a cast iron skillet like you see on the counter here. You can cook them on just a regular baking sheet or maybe even in a casserole dish or something, and they'll be okay. They just won't be as crisp on the outside and flaky as they will if you do them in a cast iron skillet. So what you're going to do is you're going to take softened butter and just spread a nice thin even layer of that all over your cast iron skillet. So that's what I'm doing there in the background, and then I'm going to set that off to the side. Now it's time to roll out our biscuit dough. So whenever you're rolling it, before you make your folds, you want to try to roll it out to about 1/4 of an inch thick. So pretty thin to make your folds. And then on your final fold, right before you cut your biscuits, you're going to leave it a little bit thicker. But this is going to be our first fold here. So we're going to roll this out pretty thin, and you'll see it starts sticking to the rolling pin. If you have that issue, just dust your pin and your dough with a little bit of extra flour and keep rolling. Okay, so when you're making these folds, my first fold is going to be from one side to the other. So your right and your left folded over top of each other. And you want to kind of try to make them overlap just in the middle of the dough. So we're going to fold like that. You're going to dust with a little bit of extra flour. That way it doesn't stick whenever we roll it out the second time. And then we're going to roll it to about 1/4 of an inch thick again. And this time you'll see I'm rolling it just to the front and back first, and then just slightly to the sides, because this time we're going to fold it from the top and the bottom. Again, dust with the flour so you don't make your dough stick and then end up ripping apart when you try to pull it up. We're going to roll again now. This is our third time going to 1/4 of an inch. And then I swung my dough back around, and we're going to fold this from the sides again. So it's from the sides, then from the top and bottom, and then from your sides again. Rolling this out. This is our final fold here. So we're not going to go as thin on this one. You just want to roll so that you get all of those layers pushed down together. So this one I'm leaving it about 1 inch thick to 1.5 inches thick, I would say. So I dumped out a little pile of flour there on the counter. For cutting your biscuits, if you have actual biscuit cutters, use those. If you do not, I don't have them. I'm using a small plastic cup that my daughter uses. You can use a regular drinking glass. You just want something that's going to make biscuits the size that you want and going to make them good and round. You could also even take, if you have like a leftover pasta sauce jar or a jelly jar or something that's going to be big enough and round enough, you can rinse that out and just use the top of that to cut these out. You don't need any super fancy tools to do this. So here I'm cutting them out. I'm going to get 4 out of this first round of dough. And this is what they'll look like. You'll see whenever I pull them up, that's about how thick you want them. And you'll see my top layer on them is coming off a little bit. That's fine because these layers are going to separate in the oven whenever they start to rise. So I'm going to put these in, and then I'm going to fill my pan up all the way. My pan will hold 7 of these, so that means I need to get 3 more out. We're going to take this dough and rework it. And to do that, you're just going to squish it back together like I'm doing here. Then we're going to roll it and fold it again, but we're only going to have to fold it 1 time this time. So here I'm rolling. And then this fold, our last fold, was from the sides. And so this fold, I'm going to fold it down towards me and then up away from me again. And then again, just rolling just enough to smash those layers together. Not rolling it super thin. And then we're going to cut out the remainder of our biscuits. And then here, my round part of my cup that I'm using to cut, it was going to be off the side of the dough a little bit, so I just folded that little piece that was hanging off in and then squished it together while I cut it, and that gave me my third biscuit. Okay, final step on these, that's how they'll look in the pan, is with your buttermilk, and this recipe is at the very end of this video. You want to mix up just a little bit extra buttermilk in that glass because you're going to brush the tops of these with it. And that's really going to help them get a nice golden brown on the top. And also the liquid being on them is going to help a little bit of a steam effect to help them rise. So I popped those in the oven, and then now I mix up my sausage and gravy and I cook that while my biscuits are cooking, because your biscuits will take about 20 minutes or so to be fully cooked. You just want to make sure they'll start getting brown on top before they're actually cooked all the way in the middle. You want to make sure that your middles are not doughy or raw. So I had a 2-pound roll of sausage. I'm only going to make half of this. So I've cut it in half, and then now I'm just taking that half out of the casing and putting it into my skillet. And you want to cook this over a medium heat. So I have mine set on the number 4 setting for my burner. And then I have one of those ground beef spatula things. This isn't a necessary thing. You can just use a spoon to break this up. But you're going to break it into smaller pieces as it cooks. So here I'm just kind of speeding through that process. So it's been cooking for about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. So it is good and browned. And you want to make sure that it is brown, not like a grayish color. So there you can see it has a nice golden brown to it. We're going to go in with a 1/4 cup of regular flour. You're going to sprinkle it over your sausage and then stir it together. And then you're going to let that cook for about 2 or 3 minutes with that flour all mixed in there. And here I'm checking on my biscuits. So they are cooked. And that's what they look like whenever they're done. So what I did was I kicked the heat off in my oven and let those sit on top for a minute. And then I just set those back in there to keep them in the warm oven so they would still be nice and hot when they're served. Last step on this gravy is 2 cups of milk. We're just going to pour that in. And I leave my burner set where it was when I was cooking, so it's still on 4. Some people like to turn it down on low. To me, it just takes more time. So it's still on the same setting. I'm going in just salt and pepper to taste. There's no specific measurement on that. That's just your personal preference. The key with this is you have to stir the whole time, and you're stirring until it gets to your desired thickness for gravy. Some people might like it a little bit more runny. I like mine a little on the thicker side, but you want to stir continuously until it is finished. So here I'm showing you, this is still kind of runny. So I'm going back in, I'm still stirring. This process here probably takes about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how thick you want it and how fast it's cooking. So I'm speeding through this. Here in just a second, you'll see I'll let it drip off of my spoon. And this is what it looks like now. You can see it's not running off. It's just kind of plopping off of the spoon. That's how I want mine. So I'm going to give it one more stir. Make sure I really scrape the bottoms of the pan. And then I'm going to take this off the burner, because if you leave it on, the hotter it gets, the thicker it will get. And you are finished. That is homemade Southern biscuits and gravy from scratch. Here is the recipe. If you guys try this and like it, please let me know down in the comments. If you enjoy our videos, please like and subscribe and check out some of our other videos that we have on here. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great day.